This is May 30th, 2020, and I'm further continuing the commentary on Pascal Boyer's book, Religion Explained, and we're in the 4th chapter, and we're dealing with, we've been dealing with gods and spirits as persons, and supernatural agents as dangerous beasts, and then gods are the likeness of gods to predators. And then we move away a little bit from the direct concern about the serious gods and spirits, and move back a little bit to imaginary companions and invisible friends. These are usually a feature of childhood, and there's been much sort of developmental psychological work done on this. I can remember my mother reminded me that I had an imaginary companion named Peter or Charles, I can't remember. Anyway, the formation of an imaginary companion is fairly common among children, and it creates sort of a complex situation that allows the individual who's doing the imagining, first of all, that person knows the difference between the imaginary nature of the companion and the reality of those people around. This is not a real person, and the child knows that. The other thing, I think parents worry about that sometimes, but it creates, actually, for the child, a really important experience, which is it sort of does a double-charged version of the social mind. Human social relations tend to be pretty complicated, and the children who have imaginary companions are actually doing something that enhances their inference systems about social interaction with other human beings. And sometimes those imaginary characters image or mirror image some of the interactions that the child is having with adults and other people, other children perhaps. Anyway, it provides very useful form of training for the social mind of humans. And interestingly, wishful thinking plays a very minor role in these fantasies. In other words, the child does not have these fantasy or imagined creatures, sometimes, but they're all person-related creatures. They're nevertheless, they can be an animal, but it's a very personable animal usually. The companion's do or say is constrained by the person they are, and this has and remains consistent and plausible. So they can't sort of act out of character, if you will. And they often create for the child an alternative viewpoint. Now, this is what we've talked of before called a decoupled mode, meaning that it's going on It could go on in the future or the past. It is not necessarily a present moment kind of experience. What he says at the end of this is differences are great as the similarities. First, for many people, spirits and ancestors are emphatically not fantasies. So it's important to understand that ancestors or spirits, as they affect an individual, are not fantasies. They're not imagined. Second, believers do not just construct their own decoupled interaction. They share with other information about the spirits and are the imagined person or character is actually a fantasy of the individual, but spiritual fantasies or gods and spirits that are actually shared with other people. So it is not an individual imagination. Third, and most important, the tenor of people's relations with spirits and God is special because of one crucial characteristic these supernatural agents, as we shall see presently, which comes next in the... Now, strategic information. This is the next, and this is a complicated little piece of work here, and is the thing is, sometimes we receive information and we don't trigger a whole lot of inference systems, and sometimes we receive information and it triggers inferences because it has strategic value. I may need to know it, or I may need to act on it. We may need to act on it. That becomes strategic. Strategic information is very important information, but it's all sort of mushed together with information that is not strategic, and it's a fairly complicated thing that the social mind has to do to separate strategic and non-strategic information. It gives us further information about the person, whether they're reliable or not. It's quite clear that they're paying attention to all sorts of cues that have nothing to do, at least at first sight, with the business at hand. Now, we have been going through a political time where there's been all kinds of conspiracy theories. This is a sort of a hyperactive part of a group, or some human beings in the population, who are seeing things that are not particularly strategic. They are simply things of information, and the information is not going to move anything or change anything, but it is sort of resolved in people's minds to be strategic when it is not. A general impression that there is either favorable or not, and it seems that all that to be all based on rather vague feeling. But note that the devices working in the mental basement are anything but vague. Our inference systems are quite specific, and they raise specific kinds of issues. So, for instance, if you were interviewing a babysitter, And you're looking for reliability, you're looking for all kinds of possibilities, and that person makes absolutely no eye contact with you. Eye contact would then be a nonverbal experience that would give some information, some strategic information about this particular person. Others might look very determinedly into your eyes. He does a little funny little thing here where he talks about the one person are aware of is a Mormon with a Mormon upbringing could give people desirable moral dispositions. So he was saying Mormonism might be a factor in interviewing the babysitter, and one could decide based on one's experience whether one found that reliable or not. Most of us would find it reliable. What we know of Mormons tends to be pretty reliable. They are consistently, but they're also a smaller group, and so there is consistency within the group itself. Okay, so one of the social points he wants to make is strategic information is a subset of all information currently available to a particular agent about a particular situation that activates mental systems that regulate social interaction. Okay, strategic information is a subset. In other words, there's a lot of information out there, but a very small part of it is strategic. And so our concerns, our social concerns, what we're going to do socially, in other words, the strategic information is buried in there and has to be figured out. So, for instance, as an example, literary preferences of your dining companion have no special effect on the ongoing interaction. Then it remains just plain information. So you're sitting, you're talking at dinner, and you're in this group of people, their literary comments are simply information, not necessarily important information. But it becomes strategic information if it triggers inferences about what to do next. So, if it has connections to future possibilities, it is strategic. If not, it is simply information. Now, for animals, it's different. Animals tend to be quite clear. If you take a group of chimpanzees, they are pretty hierarchically inclined. So, when challenging the alpha male, who's the head of the group, a younger male will make very clear movements, start screaming and rustling and waving about branches. Everybody in the troop knows what's happening. They know there is a challenge to the leader of the group. And they also know when sexual interest is being expressed. Those are very specific kinds of information. Not so with humans. In humans, there is just no way to predict whether a given piece of information is strategic or not. And there are a number of reasons for that, but one of them is that we know that that other people may not have access to the same information that we have. So every Shakespeare comedy is based on not having information. One group or one person not having the information, another group having it. And of course the audience is in on the joke, and it drives the plot. But in actual life, you have to figure it out, and everybody understands that information is not uniformly diffused, and somebody may or may not know what they need to know in order to do something. And so that is one particular limitation. To say some information is strategic is not to say anything about the information itself, but only about the way it is treated by the mind or in the mind. Let's see. If you find this a bit abstruse, consider another term that is defined in this way: reminder. When we say a particular object or situation is a reminder of something, we know that it can only be a reminder of a particular fact with a particular person. So we have this social mind, but we also have an understanding that if we have a reminder going on, if we're reminding them of something, then it's something that you know the other person knows. And those people over there probably don't know it. So you are not reminding them. To use the word strategic because it is a standard term that refers to any situation where people make moves, the consequences of which depend on other people's moves. Strategic. Okay. We know that access to information is imperfect. And we have to assume that. That's part of our assumption. That's why in humans there is just no way to predict whether a given piece of information is strategic or not, because we don't know whether everybody knows it. We also know that there are limitations. So, for instance, if we're reminding somebody of something, it's a particular person about a particular situation, and it doesn't refer to everybody. Okay. So, in social interaction, we presume that other people's access to strategic information is neither perfect nor automatic, and that's just part of the inference systems that we have. We know what information we have, and we see that. I was just watching a Hulu serial called Normal People, and in that, the idea that everybody knows everything, which is a youthful assumption, but one that is ignorant of the rules of social interaction, that not everybody knows what's going on, and not everybody knows communication is perfect. So actually in another one called Sex Education, the main character assumes he's communicating with his beloved, but she never gets it because somebody intervenes and deletes it from his phone, or her phone. So she never knows what his eternal love is because she's never heard it expressed. We assume very easily that everybody has the information they need, but in human social interaction, we have to assume that that is not true. Humans generally spend a great deal of time and energy wondering whether other people have access to the same information that is strategic from their own point of view. That is the truth. Wondering what inferences, intentions, plans, etc., these other people draw from information, trying to control their access to such information and trying to monitor and influence their inferences on the basis of such information. All these complex calculations are based on the assumption that our own and other agents' access to strategic information is complex and generally imperfect. So we don't know what's going on that easily. Anyway, it's kind of clear as mud, but it's we move on to see that these same kinds of realities are true also in relationship with supernatural agents as well, that we can't assume that they have all the information, so on and so forth. Anyway, well, more next time.